Hello, good afternoon everyone. Welcome back to the cruel, brutal and heartless capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Before we start today's video, I just want to wish all my Muslim friends Selamat Hari Raya, Happy Eid Mubarak, and please drive safely on the road and enjoy your festivities. You've earned it. Yes, enjoy yourself. And without further ado, let's begin today's video. Now I'd like you guys to answer me two very simple questions. You don't really need to think too long and hard about them. Just answer them as honestly as you can. A simple yes or no would suffice. Question 1. Do you often find yourself comparing yourself with your peers and wondering if your success measures up to the average person of your age? Question 2. When you read news stories on popular social media, or when you go on popular social media sites like Instagram, do you often receive a self-esteem drop and feel worse about yourself? Well, if you answered both of those questions with a yes, then congratulations. You are a normal working person in modern capitalist society, and your reaction is precisely what the ruling class wants out of you. What I mean to say is that you are responding to the stimuli around you in precisely the way the powers that be want you to respond. Yes, you heard me correctly. The ruling class wants you to feel bad about yourself, and they want you to feel inadequate. It's all part of the plan. And believe me, if you feel inadequate about yourself after watching popular media or after reading news stories on popular media, well, then believe me, you are nothing special, and you are in fact similar to millions of people all around the world. You see, popular media serves the function to gaslight you into behaving a certain way and believing certain things. But this is really a phenomenon that predates capitalism, which is only about 500 years old. Before capitalism, of course, we lived under feudalism. And in any given epoch in history, the ruling class has always used the power of mass media in order to mold the minds of the masses and to make them think a certain way, believe certain things, and conform to what they expect of the masses. Yes, this is something that even predates capitalism. For today's video, we're going to borrow two terms from our Marxist friends in order to explain this phenomenon: base and superstructure, which are terms that are not really mentioned very often in Marx's works, but they really are very, very important terms in order to explain the Marxist outlook of the world. Let's begin. I think it's best to begin our analysis by explaining what the superstructure of a society is. The superstructure is basically the socio-political DNA of a country, metaphorically speaking. And that can include laws, customs, institutions, political systems, religion, art, literature, and yes, popular media. Now, the superstructure of every historical epoch differs depending on who is in charge. So as I will explain later in this video, the superstructure under capitalism differs greatly from the superstructure of feudalism, which has a totally different set of norms. Now, the base, on the other hand, basically means the mode of production. Whether we're talking about the hardware of a country's production, be that feudal hardware, for example, farmlands or slave plantations, or capitalist hardware, such as factories and offices, as well as the relations of production, or the relations between people in that society. For example, the relation between the Sultan and the Rakyat, the relation between the feudal lord and the serf, the relation between the capitalist and the proletariat, and so on and so forth. That is the base. To quote the German philosopher Karl Marx,
"In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into definite relations which are independent of their will, namely relations of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness."
what Marx is saying is basically that human nature is not innate, but rather defined by the specific material conditions of the individual. And the way an individual looks at the world differs depending on this individual's position on the class hierarchy. For example, a Tansri son or daughter does not see the world in the same way as somebody who was born in a kampong or a village. And a rich man does not see the world in the same way as a poor man. A rich man's wife does not see the world in the same way as a poor man's wife. A sultan does not see the world the same way as a citizen. And of course, a feudal lord does not see the world the same way as a serf. We are all actors in the game of life, according to Shakespeare, and we all have a part to play. So we all play our part based on our position on the class hierarchy.
The mode of production of material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness.
It is from these social relations that occurs a thing that is known under Marxism as contradictions, or conflicts of interest between classes that eventually result in a clash between the classes known as class struggles, whether that be the conflict between the slave and the master, the conflict between the feudal lord and the serf, the conflict between the king and the citizens, and of course the conflict between the capitalist and the proletariat. And it is these contradictions which eventually result in a thing known as class struggle, because according to the Marxian view of the world, classes are inherently antagonistic towards each other because they have conflicting interests with each other. And as a result of these contradictions, there occurs a great social change, also known as revolution.
At a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production, or this merely expresses the same thing in legal terms, with their property relations within the framework of which they have operated hitherto. From forms of development of their productive forces, these relations turn into their fetters. Then begins an era of social revolution. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure.
For instance, the emerging merchant class in modern society, as a result of the transition from farm to factory resulted in a contradiction between this new merchant class, known as the bourgeoisie, and the feudal lords, known as the ancient regime. And it was this contradiction that led to some of the bloodiest overthrow of historical dynasties, like in 1793, when they cut off King Louis's head, or in 1649, when they cut off King Charles's head. And in fact, this might come as a surprise, but Marx actually praises the bourgeoisie as a revolutionary force during that particular period in time, in dismantling hereditary privileges and turning the wheel of history in the march of progress towards the eventual realization of a classless society. So, according to orthodox Marxist doctrine, the bourgeoisie were in fact a revolutionary force in their respective time period. For instance, Lenin was a great admirer of Maximilien Robespierre, the French revolutionary, and was a good friend of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, even though Sun Yat-sen, while you could call him a Confucian socialist, was hardly what you could describe as a Marxist, since Sun Yat-sen did not subscribe to the class struggle worldview. But nevertheless, Marxists all acknowledge the revolutionary power of the bourgeoisie when it came to dismantling aristocratic privileges. So, why then do Marxists now describe the bourgeoisie as a reactionary class? Because the bourgeoisie, after overthrowing the feudal lords or curbing their power, the bourgeoisie then became the new feudal lords. They fundamentally dismantled an old form of oppression and created a new evolution of class society. And this stage we now live in is the world of the bourgeoisie, also known as capitalism. And while Marx acknowledges, in fact, that capitalism is an improvement over feudalism, for example, that the Sultan can't just cut off your head if he's displeased with you, because we have constitutional monarchy, more work needs to be done in order to eventually dismantle classes and finally hammer the last nail into the coffin of class society for good. That's the Marxist worldview. So from the Marxist point of view, the bourgeoisie have played their revolutionary role, whether that be in the American Revolution or the French Revolution or the Chinese Revolution that ended 5,000 years of imperial Chinese history. And it is time for the proletariat or the working class to rule. So with every new epoch, with every change in the ruling class, call it regime change if you like, the base of society changes. We now no longer live under a feudal base, but now we live under a capitalist base. Because this new capitalist base, while no doubt an improvement over the feudal one, has not eradicated class society, and it has not ended oppression, but it has simply changed management from one oppressor to the next. Instead of a feudal lord oppressing a peasant, it is now the capitalist oppressing the worker. So the feudal lord fundamentally evolved into the capitalist, and the worker, or the peasant or serf, evolved into the proletariat. So a peasant lived on a feudal lord's land. He worked on the feudal lord's farm as basically an indentured servant. The proletariat works in the new feudal lord's factory and has nothing, just like his predecessor, the peasant, the proletariat has nothing but his labor power to sell, and he is basically at the mercy of the capitalist in the same way the peasant was at the mercy of the feudal lord. If the capitalist does not like you, he might not cut your head off, but he can still make you starve. He can still kill you by starvation if he doesn't give you a job, because he is the source of your sustenance. So essentially, capitalism, while an improvement, is not the end of history, because according to the Marxist worldview, it is the final antagonistic relation in history. Bourgeois society is the final antagonistic relation in all of history. The contradiction between the capitalist and the worker is fundamentally this. The capitalist wants to reap as much profit as possible, and he doesn't really care how he does it. So that is the capitalist's instinct, to reap as much profit as possible. But in order to do that, he has to sometimes cut corners, underpay the workers, overwork them, and do some pretty unscrupulous things. Ever wonder why the CEO is not a very popular person in a company? The only person who really likes the CEO is the capitalist. That's all. But the point is, the contradiction is that the capitalist wants to maximize profits at all costs, while the worker, on the other hand, wants to work less and enjoy a civilized standard of living. So in order for the capitalist, like Giorgio Armani, for instance, to enjoy his million-dollar yachts and his million-dollar mansions, somebody in a sweatshop has got to be paying for it. And this is the contradiction between the capitalist and the worker, because labor has produced beautiful things. It has, according to Marx, produced palaces for the rich, but hovels for the poor. And this is also termed exploitation. And exploitation is part and parcel of how the capitalist operates. In the same way, exploitation was part and parcel of how the feudal lord operated. So, in order to end this exploitation, the relation between the capitalist and the worker must be abolished. And so we come to the final stage of human history, socialism, or a classless society where everyone is a worker and no one is a boss. Because when no one owns the means of production, but the people producing the goods, that would make exploitation superfluous. Because when you reap the value of what you produce, you are no longer being exploited. Now, so far we have hitherto been exploring the base of society, whether that base be a feudal base or a capitalist one or a socialist one. But now it is time for us to go back to the superstructure. You see, every time a new base takes root, this also results in a dramatic change in the superstructure of a society, or like I said, the socio-political morass of a society. The superstructure under feudalism was vastly different from the superstructure under capitalism, and the superstructure under socialism will be vastly different from our current superstructure. For instance, in feudal society, it was considered conventional values in order to promote things such as loyalty to the king, being obedient to the religious overlords, and of course, being content with one's position in life. So, for example, in the story Romance of the Three Kingdoms by the Ming Dynasty author Luo Guanzhong, the hero is a man named Liu Bei, who is basically the true heir to the dragon throne. Now, Liu Bei's goal is to basically overthrow the traitor Prime Minister Cao Cao, who has usurped the throne from the emperor. And basically, by modern standards, Liu Bei should be considered a reactionary, and Cao Cao should be considered a revolutionary, right? Because Cao Cao promotes people based on merit. He has no patience for hereditary privileges, and of course, Liu Bei is fundamentally trying to restore the old order. But that was in order to preserve the existence of feudal society by portraying rebellion against the emperor, or, basically any semblance of democratic values as being inherently wicked. For instance, we Malaysians know about the story of Hang Tuah and Hang Jebat. Now, for you foreigners who don't know this story, I suggest you go and visit this video that I made a couple of months ago when I paid a visit to the Malay rebel Hang Jebat's tomb. I'm not telling you the whole story in this video because it's going to take me at least an hour. But if you're wondering why people nowadays are beginning to see Hang Jebat as the hero, it is because of the withering away of the feudal base. Malaysia is a semi-feudal country, which is why we have a mixed superstructure of both capitalist and feudal superstructure. In fact, loyalty to the king is one of the conditions of our Rukun Negara, or our oath that every student must say at assembly. So Malaysia is semi-feudal. We're not a completely capitalist society. So in this story, Jebat is supposed to be the villain, the big bad villain, because he tries to kill the Sultan. But if you're wondering why Malaysians are beginning to see Jebat as a hero, it's because over time, the feudal base is gradually withering away and being replaced by a capitalist one. So our morass, or the zeitgeist of our times, is also being replaced by bourgeois morass. For example, liberal democracy, meritocracy, and not basically seeing hereditary privileges as outmoded, and basically, that is the zeitgeist that results from a changing base, because the superstructure is meant to justify the base, or to preserve the reproduction of the base, pretty much. So, like I said, basically, the feudal superstructure emphasized the importance of loyalty to the king, obedience to religious authorities such as priests, monks, muftis, and of course the divine right of monarchs. So popular media of feudal times was meant to basically mold the minds of the masses into conforming, to basically reproduce the existence of the feudal base, or the theocratic base. But the capitalist superstructure vastly differs from the feudal one. Loyalty to the monarch is not really that important under the capitalist superstructure, but loyalty to your boss, loyalty to the capitalist, is basically treated as a virtue in itself. Pursuing material wealth is also treated as a virtue in itself. And this is why people tend to glamorize wealthy, high-status people under capitalism. Under the capitalist superstructure, you have things like basically, loyalty to your boss, Protestant work ethic, the bourgeois morality, like the nuclear family, and basically, like I said, the popular ideas of a time are basically the ideas that help to reinforce the ruling class of that particular time period. So the popular ideas of today are meant to reinforce the existence of the capitalist. And this is where we get to why social media or popular mass media in general is not your friend. Let me explain why. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you probably noticed that social media is saturated with stories of young people living high and fabulous lives, and in a time when most Malaysians are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to put food on the table, word of buzz or other such popular media outlets have to sort of rub salt into the wounds of the masses by basically putting up stories of young people, millennials or Generation Zs, making, implausible amounts of money, while the rest of us are basically struggling to make ends meet. And there's a very, very insidious purpose in all of this. Because popular media, as I've said, is part of a country's superstructure. Popular media is meant to reinforce the existence of the ruling class by portraying wealth as if it were synonymous with morality, and by portraying the pursuit of material things as being moral in itself. Basically, people are gaslighted into feeling inadequate, and basically people are gaslighted when they see things such as, a young man giving a large bouquet of money as a present to his fiancée. People are gaslighted basically into feeling inadequate, and thereby working harder for the ruling class. Why do you think the word loser is such a popular insult in capitalist society, but it was virtually non-existent in feudal society? Well, that's because that word is also meant to basically shame people who have who into working harder for the capitalist ruling class, basically. And people who use that word on other people fundamentally do not realize that they're doing the capitalist job for them when they poor shame people or treat poverty as if it were a character flaw. The same kind of effect, or an equivalent kind of word under theocratic feudal times would be things like infidel or heretic or traitor. That was the equivalent of today's word loser, because the vernacular of a society and the implications of words are also defined by the zeitgeist of our time or the superstructure of our time in order to justify the economic base. So, why do you think a man is expected to spend several months of his salary buying a worthless, useless rock that was probably dug up from some mine in Africa by an exploited laborer as a romantic gesture in order to propose to a woman, to be worthy of a woman's hand in marriage? Fundamentally, that money could have been spent on more useful things like furniture, cutlery, renovating a house that the couple are going to live in. Why are people expected and shamed for not doing this, or for not going along with this process of basically slaving away for capital and basically buying a useless rock called a diamond that's not going to serve any purpose beyond vanity reasons. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because this norm of proposing with a diamond ring, an expensive diamond ring as well, is part of our superstructure. Or basically, it is expected of us because the capitalists want us to feel that that is something we must do. Because in the end, the biggest winners of all of this will be the capitalists, the overfed fat cats who run the corporations, and the biggest losers will be us working class people who are basically conforming to the superstructure without thinking deeply about it. Yeah, we are basically slaving away, buying something that has absolutely no use value in order to basically conform to the zeitgeist of materialistic capitalist society so that we can make the capitalists richer and we can make our bosses, our bourgeoisie bosses richer as well. So I don't want to play that game. I'm not proposing with a diamond ring. I'm proposing with a plastic one. So I posed a question on Twitter recently, and in my question I asked, does popular media reinforce or defy a country's superstructure? And needless to say, the results were to my expectations. Yes, approximately 60% of them said yes, it reinforced the superstructure, while 40% of them approximately said it depends, but nobody said it defied the superstructure. Because, as you know, popular media is, after all, meant to serve the ruling class, because it is the ruling class that creates this popular media for us to ingest. So there are two things that could result from people consuming popular media. The first thing is that people will feel inadequate, they'll feel small, they'll feel worthless, and they'll slave ever harder for their capitalist overlord in the hope of not being a loser. That's the first thing that could happen. The second thing that could happen is that people will develop a sense of class consciousness. People will start questioning the unspoken rules of society, and people will start questioning the norms that don't make sense, like buying a diamond ring to put on a lady's finger just to propose to her. That doesn't really make sense from a logical perspective. How does spending 2 months of your salary on somebody show that you love that person? It shows that you love your capitalist overlord because you're working really hard for him, and it shows that you love the owner of the diamond ring company because you're buying his product. But you know, there are better ways to show love than through materialistic pursuits, right? So people might start to actually question the values that we are supposed to hold as a result of the superstructure of capitalist society, and they will become class conscious and they will rebel. So one of those two things could happen, but I hope that the second option is what describes you. Yes, it's really the case that popular media does serve the ruling class of a country. Think about it. Why do you think the Barbie movie portrays the working class Barbies slaving away happily for the bourgeois Barbies, who happen to be the heroes of the story? Why are the bourgeois Barbies, the exploiters of society, the heroes of the society? And why are the working class Barbies happily slaving away for them? Why does rap music glorify the acquisition of wealth, even through ill-gotten means? And why do you think American movies tend to portray American soldiers as the good guys and American capitalists like Bruce Wayne, for example, as inherently virtuous. Why do you think James Bond, who is a brutal hitman for one of the most oppressive institutions in the world, the British royal family, is portrayed as the good guy in Western literature and Western Hollywood movies? Well, there's a reason for this, and it is a nefarious one. It's all part of the capitalist industrial complex, my friends, and the sooner you break free of this mental brainwashing, the better you'll be, the better off you'll be. Now, does that mean that you can't enjoy popular media? Am I such a naysayer, such an unfun person that I'm telling you to not enjoy popular media and to have a doomer-like view of the world? No, of course not. I mean, you can enjoy it in moderation with a healthy pinch of salt, like alcohol. No, I'm just joking. Don't put salt into your alcohol. It will not turn out well. But the point is, you know, I'm not saying you cannot enjoy popular media, but I am saying take it with a pinch of salt and realize that popular media serves to reinforce the capitalist base and stifle class consciousness. And popular media is fundamentally a tool of the ruling class to make you conform to what the ruling class expects of you. So, yeah, don't be a flying monkey for the ruling class. Watch popular media, read popular media for all I care, but bear in mind that popular media is not your friend, and popular media is meant to gaslight you into slaving harder for your capitalist overlords, or basically conform to the mores of capitalist society, whether it is in your best interest or not. Just be aware of what the ruling class is trying to do. The ruling class is desperately trying to reproduce its own existence. And so we can either question the mores of our society, and we can start forming class solidarity with each other. Like I said, you have so much more in common with a working class person of your own race, of a different race and religion, pardon me, than you do with a capitalist of your own race and religion. So, you know, like if you haven't picked up anything from this video, I want you to form class solidarity with other working people. And if you're born into a bourgeois family, no, it doesn't mean you are an evil person, yeah? Lenin was born into a bourgeois family, as was Marx and Engels. But ultimately, that makes you a class traitor, in a good way, if you will basically turn against your own class and fight for the emancipation of the working people. So anyway, I'm going to end my video now, and I want to thank you for watching if you have watched until this point. And as always, please subscribe to my channel. And thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. And to all our Muslim friends, again I say, Happy Eid. Bye-bye.